Welcome back. Thanks very much for staying on with us. You're watching WION Climate Tracker with me, Molly Gambhir. And before we get started, a quick look at what's lined up on the show for you. Pakistan is facing a catastrophe like no other. Monsoon rainfall caused devastation at a scale not witnessed in the recent past. Over 900 people have lost their lives. Hundreds more have been forced to move out of their homes. The monsoon season started in June and it has been causing havoc since the word go. Parts of Pakistan witnessed a record amount of rain, prompting the country to seek international help. According to the United Nations, heavy rainfall and floods affected some 2.3 million people across the country.
रोड में पड़ा हूँ ऐसे को 5 दिन थिया न राशन न तंबू ऐसे छोटा बच्चा और मींह मथू बारिश है कुछ भी नहीं है न तंबू है बीमार से बच्चा नंढा मर जाएगा अभी क्या करूँ रोड में पड़ा है हम अंदर पानी है ज़बरदस्त पानी है और कुछ भी नहीं मिला 5 दिन थिया न रोटी है न तंबू है न कुछ भी नहीं नंढा छोटा बाल हमारा बीमार थे.
Just in the last 24 hours, dozens have died after being washed away by flood waters. About 9 of them were children. Sindh and Balochistan are 2 worst hit regions. Rainfall was 500% higher than normal in one province and 430% in the other. Adding to the residents' woes, a fresh spell of rainfall was seen in Hyderabad. This is the second largest city in the Sindh province. And being a low-lying area, businesses, trade, commercial activities have been put on hold for now.
सारा सामान हमारा डूबा हुआ है घर और मेरे तो झोपड़ी एक कच्ची छत है वो तो बिल्कुल टूट गई है आपने देखा है जैसा कि और ये कि सारा सामान हमारा पानी के अंदर बह रहा है और यहाँ पर ना इतने सारे जानवर पैदा हो गए इस पानी के अंदर और कीड़े मकोड़े सांप यहाँ तक कि यहाँ पर सांप निकल चुके हैं जो बच्चों को 2-3 बच्चों को तो काट चुके हैं जख्म हो गया बुखार में मुब्तला हैं यहाँ कोई मेडिसिन वगैरह का भी यहाँ पर कोई इंतजामात नहीं है कि प्लीज़ मेहरबानी करके आप लोग हमारी हेल्प करें मदद करें ताकि हम इस मुश्किल से निकल सकें.
The annual monsoon is crucial to Pakistan's agricultural sector. Irrigation of crops and replenishment of the water bodies heavily depending on it. But this year, monsoon brought less relief and more fury. July's national rainfall was almost 200% above average, destroying nearly 2 million acres of farmland so far. While limited-scale devastation is expected during this season, each year climate change is pushing the bar higher. This year, Pakistan has really seen the worst of both worlds. It started with an unprecedented heat wave, with temperatures hitting as high as 51 degrees Celsius in the same Sindh province, which is now grappling with floods. Pakistan is 8th on a list of countries deemed most vulnerable to extreme weather events. Dr. Imran Khalid, Director Governance and Policy WWF Pakistan, is now joining us from Islamabad. Thanks very much for being here with us. Floods are an annual affair, but just how bad is this year's flooding situation in Pakistan? If you can just put this into context for us.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. So yes, floods are a regular occurrence in Pakistan as they're across South Asia, but this year's floods are a reminder of the 2010 floods that devastated Pakistan. That was like a hint of things to come as far as climate change is concerned. Already we've got about 1,000 people dead, a significant portion of whom are women and children. We've got livestock losses amounting to over 500,000 and people displaced across the country in their thousands. The flooding episodes started earlier this year, right after the heat wave up in the north, where in Gilgit-Baltistan we saw glacial lake outburst flooding affect our northern areas. Then slowly and surely, as the monsoon set in, we saw riverine flooding and flooding via the hill torrents. And now the monsoon rains have added to the mix. And so the devastation is quite enormous. As you were saying earlier, our crops have been affected, the rice crop, the cotton crop, vegetables that we grow for in terms of maintaining our food security, they've been affected. So the situation is quite dire.
Right. A lot of experts say that climate change is responsible for this increase in flooding. Can you also shed some light in view of the high temperatures which are causing the ice to melt faster, given that Pakistan is home to more than 7,000 glaciers? That's more than anywhere else outside the poles.
Right. So, yes, the glaciers are under a threat of melting. And as you know, the Himalayan, Hindu Kush, Karakoram mountain ranges are known as the third pole because of the amount of glaciers that we have here in South Asia, apart from the north and south poles. But this is only part of the equation. The glaciers are melting and they're resulting in what's known as glacial lake outburst floods. As glaciers melt, they form a lake, and then that lake, kind of falls. There's an ice dam, and it falls apart, and then there's flooding, and that's known as glacial lake outburst flooding. But beyond that, we're seeing intense activity as far as the monsoons are concerned, right? So this is coming on the heels of the heat wave that we had. We're facing sea level rise, we're facing drought. So it's a whole plethora of things that we're facing as a result of climate change, and they're all affecting us. You highlighted how July was one of the wettest months in the past few decades, with nearly 200% more rain than average. This is quite catastrophical. In Balochistan province, we've seen about 300% more rain than the annual average. And so it's affecting us in numerous ways.
And just how prepared is the Pakistan government to tackle these climate-driven calamities? We are looking at the situation on the ground, and it does mean that there would be a requirement for a lot of investment in infrastructure as well.
Yes, infrastructure is important. We've seen a lot of roads damaged, highways, communication lines have been disconnected. But Pakistan is as well prepared as any developing country can hope to be, given the climate crisis. So we do have a climate policy. We're working on a climate adaptation plan that needs to be localized and brought, that needs to take into account local needs. The government is responding to the best of its capabilities, but it's in a reactive mode. I think we need to go beyond that and make climate adaptation a part of our development planning. But remember, this isn't our doing. This isn't our doing when it comes to Pakistan, India, Philippines, Bangladesh. The genesis of the climate crisis has its roots in the global West, in the Western countries. Their road to progress has been paved through greenhouse gas emissions that are now taking their toll on developing countries like Pakistan. So those countries also have to pick up the mantle as far as addressing the loss and damage that Pakistan is facing right now. Right. They've made a number of promises as part of the Climate Paris Agreement, but now is the time to really, fulfill those. And finally, let me just add that this is a regional problem as well, and we need to move beyond thinking in terms of political boundaries, because climate change does not recognize political boundaries, be they national or international. Hence, there needs to be cooperation amongst countries across South Asia in terms of data sharing, knowledge sharing, and learning from each other in terms of how we can respond to such crises.
Right. Dr. Imran Khalid, appreciate very much for joining us here.
Thank you so much.
On to China now. The unprecedented heat wave has dried up the rivers, wilted crops and sparked forest fires this summer. It has grounded ships, caused hydropower shortages and forced major cities to dim their lights. Receding waters have revealed long submerged ancient bridges and Buddhist statues. It has been 73 days and counting. The heat wave has easily surpassed China's record of 62 days in 2013. All-time highs are being broken, often only to be rebroken days later. The high heat and the drought igniting numerous fires over the past week, with particularly intense blazes in central parts of the country near Chongqing, a city along the trickling Yangtze River. The firefighters are dropping fire retardant on wooded areas in the district of Beibei, north of the city's urban center. Aerial footage from the state news showing the smoke rising from the forest area, and local authorities have deployed more than 1,600 fire crews to battle the growing forest fires from both air and ground. Officials have warned this month that temperatures were rising faster in China than the rest of the world, and a record-breaking heat wave has raised concern about its ability to adapt to rapid climate change. The National Meteorological Center downgraded its national heat warning to orange after 12 consecutive days of red alerts. But temperatures are still expected to exceed 40 Celsius in Sichuan and other parts of the Yangtze Basin. The landscape of the Chinese megacity has been transformed by an unusually long and intense heat period, including the surrounding farmland and steep, picturesque mountains. In fact, Chinese meteorologists are calling it the country's strongest heat wave since record-keeping started in 1961. Reservoirs in hydropower have fallen to half of their normal levels, and demand for air conditioning has also surged. Thousands of factories making processor chips, solar panels have been shut down to guarantee stable electricity supply to daily life. This is Poyang Lake in Jiangxi province, China's biggest freshwater lake, known as the kidney because of the role that it plays in regulating the flow of the Yangtze River. A pagoda-topped island, which is normally surrounded by water, is now fully visible. It testifies to the dramatic impact of a long drought and heat wave. Poyang's hydrological functions have also been eroded over the years by sand mining and the construction. Authorities have proposed building a large gate to exert more control over the water flows, a move criticized by the green groups. The prolonged heat is also impacting the power supplies of the country. Officials have issued orders to ration the power supply, and they are going to great lengths to save electricity. Take a look at these images, for example. This is an office in China's Sichuan province. It looks like a sweatshop. Only the computers are running. The employees are working here without any lights, air conditioners, or even fans. There is no clarity if there is a ban on charging mobile phones as well. And then we have this picture. Giant blocks of ice have replaced air conditioners in this office. Again, this is from China's Sichuan. Last week, the province ordered power cuts for just 6 days, and now that order has been extended for 11 days. Over 5 million people are affected by the drought and the power cuts in China, and there is no short-term relief in sight. These natural disasters are hitting the Chinese economy, and their impact is expected to be as bad, if not worse, than the Wuhan virus pandemic. On to Russia now, where forest fires are threatening the European part of the country. A fire has been raging in the Ryazan region, which is 250 kilometers from Moscow. It has grown uncontrollable, with smoke reaching the capital city. Wildfires in the far east of Russia have been traditionally difficult, the terrain making it difficult for the firefighters to douse the blaze.
Unfortunately, wildfires continue spreading because of the strong wind. In some districts, the seats of the wildfires are in 5-kilometer zones near human settlements. This is of particular concern. So I ask you to take all necessary measures for the blaze suppression and for minimizing the damage. And most importantly, to protect people, animals and the nature.
More than 9,500 firefighters and rescuers have been sent to put out the fires. Apart from that, 8 planes and 7 helicopters have also been deployed. The forest fires have devastated nearly 12,000 hectares, with temperatures rising above 31 degrees Celsius. The worrying part is that there has been no rainfall in the last few weeks, and no rain is expected anytime soon. For Europe, it has been a summer of unusually high temperatures and heat waves. Scientists are blaming climate change for a slew of forest fires. An oil spill has tainted the beautiful beaches in California. A fuel transfer between a tanker and an onshore facility led to a spill of an estimated 110,000 gallons of oil. According to the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, the spill was caused by a fire on a yacht named Fortius, and this has majorly affected the natural protected area of Balandra Beach. The oil leaked out of a pipeline carrying the fuel from a Chevron-owned vessel to a facility about 50 miles south of San Diego. Some 200 members of the Mexican Navy are helping in the cleanup of the beaches. In addition to garbage and burnt debris of the sunken yacht, oil, diesel, ash and soot were found on the surface of the Balandra beach. Coast Guard officials have been flying over the area to assess whether the oil might reach the beaches in the United States. On Wednesday, Germany inaugurated a railway line powered entirely by hydrogen. At a time when Europe is facing an energy crisis due to the war in Ukraine, this is a major step forward for green train transport despite the supply challenges. A fleet of 14 trains has replaced diesel locomotives on the 100 kilometers of track connecting 4 cities near Hamburg to the German state Lower Saxony.
I'm extremely satisfied, extremely happy with this world premiere, because this is the first train in serial production being used every day by passengers. And I think it will completely change the way we look at trains. And in particular, it will open and pave the way for a complete transformation of all diesel trains into hydrogen electrified trains.
Nutzen wollen, wir wollen, wir werden das Energieland Nummer 1 für ganz Deutschland werden. Nicht nur was die Produktion von Erneuerbaren angeht, sondern vor allen Dingen auch was die intelligente Verwendung dieser erneuerbaren Energien betrifft. Und dafür haben wir ja ein besonders schönes Beispiel.
Hydrogen trains are a promising way to decarbonize the rail sector and replace climate-warming diesel. 20% of the journeys in Germany are still powered by diesel. The trains mix hydrogen on board with oxygen present in the ambient air, and this is done with the help of a fuel cell installed on the roof. Hydrogen-powered trains are being called a zero-emission mode of transport. According to the regional rail operator LNBG, the fleet, which cost $93 million, would prevent 4,400 tons of carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere each year. Air travel is fast recovering from the hit that it took during the pandemic. About 4,000 flights take off every single hour. India alone has seen a tremendous growth in its aviation sector. It is estimated that this year the number of flyers might touch 100 million. Economically, this calls for celebration. But what about its environmental impact? We are decoding that for you in our next report.
Shifting to sustainable aviation fuels is often talked about. But what about the emissions from airports? In its fight against climate change, India is gearing up to make its airports carbon neutral in the next 2 years. Indian Aviation Ministry is presently monitoring carbon emissions from 30 airports. These actually represent the majority of air traffic in India. And between 2020 and 2021, carbon emissions at these airports was around 0.3 million tons. This was at the time of COVID pandemic when flights were very, very thin. What does this mean, and why is this of concern? While airports too emit harmful greenhouse gases which impact the climate. If you're wondering how, let me explain. Airports use ground fuel for cars, fossil fuel for electricity and heating, and jet fuel for auxiliary power units. Well, India has taken cognizance of this and has pledged to make 26 of its airports carbon neutral by 2024. 5 of these in Delhi, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Kochi and Bengaluru have already begun the work. So within 2 years, 21 more airports will join the list.
Today we have already in India, out of the 141 airports, heliports and waterdromes, 131 are airports alone. Out of those 131, we have already about 5 airports that are pretty much carbon neutral. You would say between level 3 and level 4 plus. And those airports are Hyderabad, Mumbai, Delhi, Cochin and Bangalore. Another 6 airports in the next 2 years will become close to carbon neutral. Our plan is to ensure that we have carbon neutrality as far as Airports Authority of India is concerned on close to 26 airports by 2024. And mind you, 15 airports alone in India contribute 80% of India's total emissions out of this basket of 131. And so therefore carbon neutrality to us really means that you are carbon net zero in terms of emissions. And so therefore the focus is on renewable energy, the focus is on RPOs through the grid, the focus is on, as I mentioned, solar power and being carbon neutral.
It is commendable for India to take a step like this, especially at a time when Western nations are walking the opposite direction of their climate pledges. Interestingly, Indian airports emit far less carbon than others. Is this in absolute terms? Should it not be correlated to the number of flights and passenger load? Well, according to a global study of 2021, New Delhi Airport recorded the least carbon emissions of 5.53 million tons annually, which is 1/3 of London's Heathrow Airport, and less than half of the emissions at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport. South Korea's Incheon Airport and the Frankfurt and Hong Kong airports produce over 10 million tons of carbon dioxide per annum.
Civil aviation is only 2% of total emissions internationally. Fortunately, it's a high-profile industry, but it's also unfortunate that it's a high-profile industry, because with the bouquets, you also get the brickbats. But we are only 2% of global emissions. And even if you look at within the transportation sector, civil aviation contributes only about 11.6% of the total emissions within transportation.
According to the International Civil Aviation Ministry, 10 million people around the world fly per day. Goods worth $18 billion are transported every day, and with globalization at play, experts say air traffic will rise by 4.3% per year over the next 20 years.
The impact of carbon emissions on our world have been a major source of concern. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions can restrict the impact of climate change. In the fight against climate change, India and several other countries are taking conscious steps to bring down these emissions in the aviation sector. India's Aviation Ministry is also carrying out carbon mapping of all its airport assets to make airports carbon neutral in India. With video journalist Neeraj Patel, this is Aditi Gupta for WION World is One.
Authorities in Chile have said that the plains of northern Chile will once again be filled with flowers and colors. This year's winter rainfall setting the stage for a desert bloom in the Atacama Desert. Our next report getting you the complete story. Take a look.
The Atacama Desert in northern Chile. It's the oldest and driest desert in the world. However, a lesser-known fact about the desert is that it explodes with new plant life every few years. Now, after this year's winter rains, the plains of northern Chile will once again be filled with flowers and colors.
In June, there was a downpour in the Huasco province. In many sectors, there were over 80 millimeters of water. In the center of the Copiapó province and in Caldera, there were around 38 millimeters of water. This is telling us that the 2022 flowering desert phenomenon could be intense.
A desert bloom is a climatic phenomenon which takes place in some deserts around the world in years when rainfall is unusually high. During a desert bloom, thousands of wildflowers cover the area in color. The Atacama Desert is home to over 200 different types of wildflowers.
It's just starting. We expect to see a more intense blooming in the second half of September. Right now, what you find in the park's area are Encilia canescens and carnations.
During the second half of September, Chile's Llanos de Xale National Park is expecting an intense blossoming season, which will attract a lot of tourism. While authorities are getting ready to receive those tourists, they have said that the invitation comes with a call to take care of the place. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Mother Nature is full of wonders, and this show talks about how we as human beings are destroying it. This is our only home, and the onus is on us to save our planet. Before we end this show, we're leaving you with these mesmerizing images from Gibraltar. This is a time-lapse video of the clouds produced by Levante, an easterly wind which brings warm, moist air from the Mediterranean. Thanks for watching.